No one in Delmore has forgotten the Bellmore children's eyes, wide, silent, and never quite focused on the person in front of them. They blinked like they were trying to adjust to a light no one else could see. Delmore, New York. Population just under 2,000. Nestled among the lower Catskill ridges, it's a town most people pass on their way to somewhere more scenic. Main Street has 3 antique shops, 1 diner that's closed on Tuesdays, and a post office that still hand stamps letters. It's the kind of place where church bells ring on the hour, and the mayor lives 2 doors down from the librarian. But behind the warmth and Sunday stillness, there's a name most residents will not speak if you ask: the Bellmores. Between 1957 and 1972, the Bellmore family lived in the southernmost house in Delmore, a weather-warped colonial at the edge of Hartley Woods. It had once belonged to the original mill owners back in the 1800s, with stone foundations that predated the Civil War. Locals had always whispered that it was cursed, or at the very least wrong. Children walked a little faster past it on their way to school. By the early 1960s, the town called it simply the Bellmore Place, with the kind of tone that turned whispers sharp. Gideon Bellmore moved his family to Delmore in the fall of 1957. A former theology professor from Albany with a reputation for radical ideas, he arrived with his wife Edith and their 3 children, twins Marjorie and Ellen, aged 6, and the eldest son Thomas, who was 9. Gideon had taken early retirement from the university under undisclosed circumstances, and it wasn't long before townspeople began asking quiet questions. He didn't like to be looked at, recalls Frank Myers, now 84, who was the town barber at the time. Had these dark gloves, always smelled like metal. His kids didn't talk to no one. I cut the boy's hair once. Thomas had a strange patch, back of his head. Looked surgical. In the early years, the Bellmores kept mostly to themselves. Gideon was seen in town only to collect mail or purchase obscure items from the hardware store. Chains, industrial locks, sulfur. Edith came to church once and never returned. The children were enrolled in the Delmore Elementary School for a single semester before being withdrawn abruptly. After that, no one saw much of them at all. But it was the sounds from the Bellmore basement that began to unsettle the town. By 1960, multiple neighbors reported hearing what they described as chanting or rhythmic voices coming from the house during the early hours of the morning. The first official complaint was filed by Eliza Routledge, who lived across the field on Dunham Road. In a statement dated June 3, 1961, she wrote, "Between 3 and 4 a.m., the noise started, a low humming vibration like voices speaking under the floor. It went on for nearly an hour. I knocked once. There was no answer. I saw someone move behind the curtains." Eliza's letter was passed to the Delmore sheriff, who did nothing. At the time, the law required a clear cause for entry, and Gideon Bellmore was known to be litigious. Over the next 5 years, the Bellmores fell deeper into isolation. Rumors thickened. Edith was seen only once after 1963, peering from an attic window during a rainstorm, wearing what one boy described as wedding veil made of burlap. The children stopped appearing altogether. Then came the first disappearance. In October of 1966, a teenage boy named Charlie Weller vanished while attempting a Halloween dare. He had just turned 16 and was dared by his friends to knock on the Bellmore door at midnight. His younger sister, Andrea Weller, now in her 70s, was the last person to see him alive. He had this dumb paper crown on, she told investigators decades later. Said he was going to go into the Bellmore yard, knock twice, and run. But he never ran. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then we ran. Sheriff's deputies searched the surrounding woods and the Bellmore property. Gideon denied having seen the boy. No evidence of Charlie was ever found. Strangely, within 2 months, the Bellmores vanished from Delmore entirely. No moving truck, no forwarding address. The house stood silent. No lights, no voices. It was as if the family had dissolved into the stone. But that wasn't the end. It was just the part no one could explain. In the spring of 1973, nearly 7 years after the Bellmores disappeared, the town began discussing what to do with the abandoned house. The structure was beginning to rot, attracting trespassers. After a series of town hall meetings, it was decided that the house would be condemned and demolished. But when workers arrived, they found the front door chained shut from the inside. It took 3 deputies to break it open. What they discovered inside would unravel decades of silence and secrecy. The furniture was still intact, plates on the table, beds made. Dust had gathered, but only in odd places. In one corner of the living room, they found a child's rocking horse that appeared recently used. Shoe prints, small, narrow, led toward the kitchen and back again, overlapping in manic repetition. Then they found the basement door. It was bolted 5 different ways with a carved symbol across the frame. Sheriff Alan Graves, who led the demolition team, described it in his initial report. The door was sealed with iron nails. Something had been smeared along the edge. It looked like wax. Or animal fat. There were claw marks on the handle, long ones, almost deliberate. Once opened, the basement exhaled a smell so putrid that several workers vomited. It was not the scent of rot alone, but something worse. The air was heavy, almost humid like a tunnel. They descended the narrow stairs with flashlights. What they found was not a cellar. It was a room, roughly 20 by 15 feet, lined with mirrors. Every surface, walls, ceiling, floor, was mirrored, many cracked or warped by heat. In the center stood an iron ring bolted into the floor, with lengths of chain extending from it. Dried blood stained the concrete in patterns that forensic analysts would later describe as ceremonial in nature. There were fingernail marks in the stone, and, in a far corner, hidden behind a wooden partition, they found 5 small dolls. Each was wrapped in cloth. Each bore a name stitched into the fabric: Marjorie, Ellen, Thomas, Edith, Gideon. All had their eyes sewn shut. Photos of the basement were never released publicly, though several were included in the internal report from the Delmore County Sheriff's Department. That report was sealed in 1975 following the involvement of the FBI. But before it was sealed, a single line from that report leaked to the Albany Ledger, a local paper that ran one article on the Bellmore house before being pressured to retract. The line read, "Preliminary testing indicates presence of human tissue fragments embedded in the southern wall." From that point onward, the town of Delmore did everything it could to erase the Bellmores from its memory. The house was quietly demolished in 1976. No record exists of who performed the demolition. No debris was left behind. In its place, a small clearing remains, surrounded by thorn bushes and rusting wire fence. But in 1982, a new family moved into a nearby property, just 200 yards from where the Bellmore house once stood. Their son, Michael Cresswell, was 9. He began talking to someone named Ellen. Michael Cresswell was a quiet child, artistic, withdrawn. By all accounts, there had never been anything unusual about him, until they moved into the old Wexler property just beyond Hartley Woods, near the ruins of the Bellmore house. It began the second week after the move. Michael was found sitting alone in the yard, facing the woods, speaking to someone who wasn't there. I asked who he was talking to. Recalls his mother, Denise Cresswell, in a 1998 interview with the State Child Welfare Board. He said, "Ellen?" I asked if Ellen was a girl from school, and he said no. He said, "She lives under the roots, but she's not allowed out when the sky is bright." At first, the Cresswells assumed it was a harmless imaginary friend. After all, Michael had been uprooted from his old life, and the woods could stir any child's imagination. But soon, his behavior changed. He refused to enter the basement of their new home. He would go stiff at the top of the stairs, crying without explanation. He started drawing figures on the walls, chalk outlines of children with no eyes and long red slashes across their mouths. One night, Denise woke to find him standing at the window, scratching his arms until they bled. When she asked what he was doing, he whispered, "I'm making the door. Ellen says it has to be drawn in blood or it won't open." Concerned, the Cresswells reached out to a child psychologist in Albany, Dr. Howard Lemley. Over 6 sessions, Lemley documented a pattern of dissociative behavior. But what disturbed him most were the Al's names Michael kept repeating: Ellen, Marjorie, Gideon. These were not common names for a 9-year-old in 1982, Lemley later testified in a deposition. When asked where he heard them, Michael would say things like, "They told me. They talk to me when the mirrors are off." At this point, Dr. Lemley contacted local authorities to investigate the land's history. That's when the name Bellmore re-entered the picture. Delmore's town clerk, Martha Hain, confirmed the Cresswells' home sat less than 200 yards from the former Bellmore residence. Lemley dug deeper and found remnants of the original 1973 demolition report, long since redacted but preserved in microfiche by the county archive before the order to seal came down. Lemley never made it past page 12. He resigned from his practice the following month. According to colleagues, he gave no explanation beyond a handwritten note found in his office drawer. There are places where memory becomes structure. There are houses that never forget. That same week, Michael Cresswell disappeared. It was early morning, October 14, 1983. His bedroom window was open. No forced entry, no footprints, no signs of a struggle. His mother told investigators she had heard footsteps downstairs around 3 a.m. and assumed it was the furnace rattling. His father was in Rochester on business. Michael's bedsheets were cold. On the floor beside his bed was a single mirror shard still wet. A multi-agency search ensued, but no trace of the boy was ever found. The only clue was a drawing discovered under his pillow, the same chain circle that had been found in the Bellmore basement 10 years earlier. Beneath it, written in child's handwriting, "She took me to the underneath. Don't try to dig. There's more than dirt." The Cresswell case would eventually become the breaking point for Delmore. By the mid-1980s, whispers around town had grown into collective unease. 3 other children, unconnected to the Cresswells or Bellmores, had gone missing between 1984 and 1987, all within a 3-mile radius of the old Bellmore grounds. None were ever recovered. Each family reported strange behavior in the weeks before disappearance: fear of mirrors, drawings of tunnels, voices speaking from the floorboards. At least 2 children mentioned the name Ellen. In 1989, newly appointed Sheriff Daniel Voss reopened the original Bellmore file. He requested access to the sealed materials from the FBI and was denied, so he did what his predecessors hadn't. He went to the site himself. By then, the ruins of the Bellmore house were buried beneath 30 years of overgrowth. But one structure remained a partial foundation wall, partly collapsed but still visible at the tree line. Voss brought a forensic team. What they uncovered would change the course of the investigation permanently. In the southern quadrant of the ruin, under approximately 4 feet of packed earth and stone, they found an iron trapdoor. It matched no architectural plans for the original Bellmore house. It was not visible in aerial surveys or demolition blueprints. It was not meant to be found. Rust had fused the edges, but with acetylene torches and leverage, the team forced it open. A shaft descended 12 feet, ladderless, into what appeared to be a subterranean chamber. Voss descended first, followed by forensic officer Karen Dietz. They recorded the interior by camcorder. Footage from that camera would later be seized and classified under federal jurisdiction. Only the following descriptions survive from Voss's personal notes, smuggled out before the seizure: walls made of quarried black stone, volcanic, not native to the area. Symbols etched into every surface, including ceiling, possibly Hebrew, but heavily distorted, appears closer to Proto-Samaritan script. Floor covered in ash and what appear to be vertebrae, small, childlike. Unclear if human. At northern end, a narrow passage continues for approximately 14 meters, too small for adult entry. Inside this tunnel, Dietz found what she described as a crude altar made of bone and glass. There were 5 more dolls, same pattern. Eyes sewn shut, lips sealed with copper wire. One bore a name none of them recognized: Michael. 2 days later, the site was shut down under orders from the state. An unmarked team arrived in black trucks, confiscated all footage and documentation, and escorted Voss and his team off the property. No formal explanation was ever given. No records were made public. Sheriff Voss would resign less than 6 months later. He moved to Oregon and never spoke publicly about Delmore again. But Karen Dietz did. In 2002, she released a statement to a private investigator researching the Bellmore case for an upcoming documentary. The project was later abandoned, but her written testimony was leaked online before being taken down. In it, she wrote, "It wasn't just a basement. It was a mirror. A mirror of something that's always been under us. I don't think the Bellmores made it. I think they found it, and I think they worshipped what lived inside." In 2006, on the 50th anniversary of the Bellmores' arrival in Delmore, an anonymous tip was delivered to the Albany Times-Herald. It contained no return address. Inside was a single photograph, aged and grainy, showing what appeared to be 3 children standing in the Bellmore basement. 2 were unmistakably Marjorie and Ellen Bellmore, though both looked far older than any known photograph of them. Their eyes had been blacked out with ink. The 3rd child stood between them, gaunt, barefoot, wearing a paper crown. On the back of the photo, in faded pencil, "He knocked at midnight. Now he watches the door from the other side." The image was confirmed to match the layout of the 1973 Bellmore basement, specifically the angle of the mirror wall and iron ring. The newspaper never ran the story. But the town of Delmore did not forget. The Cresswells moved away in 1991. The Weller family left long before that. The woods around Hartley remain overgrown, the clearing silent. And yet, each year near the end of October, new symbols are found carved into the trees. Always the same: a circle split down the middle. Sometimes a small handprint beside it. And each time, someone in town reports hearing that same low vibration long past midnight, like voices echoing beneath the floor. It took decades for someone outside Delmore to take the Bellmore story seriously. That person was Professor Adrian Lawton, a religious anthropologist from the University of Michigan. In 2013, while researching fringe spiritualist cults in upstate New York, Lawton came across a passing mention of the Bellmore family in a sealed court transcript from a 1974 real estate settlement involving the Hartley parcel. He petitioned for access to Delmore's public land registry and uncovered something unusual. The Bellmore property had never been officially sold. In fact, the deed still listed ownership under a now defunct institution called the Threnody Institute, incorporated in 1954 out of Albany. The Threnody Institute had no website, no listed members, and no modern presence in any academic or theological database. But one archived document from 1955, filed with the New York Department of State, named Gideon Bellmore as one of its 3 founding members. According to the document, the Institute's mission was to investigate, preserve, and engage in ancient practices related to liminal thresholds and the sanctity of mirrored sanctums. No further records existed. The Institute was dissolved in 1968, 1 year after Charlie Weller disappeared. What disturbed Professor Lawton most were 2 things. First, the Institute had purchased the Delmore property under its name, not Gideon's. And second, they had filed the building's original renovation permit under a code known as Structure 89. The number struck him. It matched the year 1889 that an obscure theological paper had been published in Rhinebeck, New York, titled On the Nine-Faced God in the Gate Beneath the Skin. The author, unknown. But the paper had been cited exactly once in an academic context, by Gideon Bellmore in 1938, during a lecture on ancient covenant rituals. Lawton became obsessed. He traveled to Delmore in 2014. The town received him coldly. No one wanted to talk about the Bellmores. No one wanted to walk near Hartley Woods. When he asked where the original basement might have been, an older man at the diner simply said, "It ain't the basement you should worry about. It's what they opened it's on tow." Undeterred, Lawton spent 2 nights camped near the overgrown clearing. On the second night, just past 3 a.m., he reported hearing something beneath his tent. Not an animal, not footsteps, but a rhythm. He described it later in a field note, 3 tones. Low, almost mechanical, vibrational, like a chime being rung underwater. It was coming from below, not beside me, not around me. Below. On his 3rd day, he discovered the ruins of a secondary structure deeper in the woods. Just stones now, sunk into earth. But etched into one remaining wall was the same symbol from the dolls and drawings, a circle, split vertically, with a narrow black slit through the center. He took photographs and soil samples, then left Delmore, intending to publish his findings. He never did. In February 2015, Lawton was found in his Ann Arbor apartment, having reportedly hanged himself with copper wire. No suicide note was found, only a single phrase etched into the inside of his closet door, using what appeared to be a burned spoon. "It doesn't blink when you look at it through glass." The phrase was eerily similar to a line once spoken by Michael Cresswell during one of his final therapy sessions in 1982, according to Dr. Lemley's lost case notes, recovered decades later by a student journalist. Michael had said, "Ellen said the mirrors are safe if you blink. If you don't blink, it climbs through." These patterns weren't just coincidence, they were ritualistic, deliberate. In 2017, an anonymous whistleblower released a cache of internal documents from the FBI's Albany office relating to the Bellmore cult incident. Investigation of 1974. The files, uploaded briefly to an encrypted server before being removed, revealed the existence of a multi-department task force created in the mid-70s under the codename as Project Latchkeys. Project Latchkey was tasked with investigating a growing number of disappearances and occult activities in rural New York and Pennsylvania. The Bellmore case was its pilot. Among the most disturbing revelations was a 1974 transcript of an interview conducted with a man named Milton Dyer, a former Trinity Institute member turned state informant. Dyer had been arrested in connection with a separate case involving illegal confinement and psychological abuse at an unlicensed spiritual retreat in Vermont. In exchange for immunity, Dyer offered testimony about the Bellmores. Here is a portion of his recorded statement. "They weren't the first to use the house. It was there before they came. Before any of us came. The Trinity Institute didn't build the sanctum. They excavated it. It was already there, under the Hartley land. But they believed it had to be activated through witness. That's what Gideon called it. The witness right. The mirrors are part of it. They're not for seeing. They're for holding the shape." When asked what was meant by shape, Dyer reportedly went silent for 47 seconds, then said, "I don't think it has one. That's the problem. The mirrors make it stay in one place, without them to uncoils." He would later claim that Gideon Bellmore had conducted at least 9 write-its between 1961 and 1966. Each required a human subject. Each was offered, beneath the earth. When asked how many subjects were children, Dyer replied, "All but one. Edith was the first. She went willingly." The tapes ended abruptly. Following the leak of Project Latchkey, the FBI refused to acknowledge their authenticity. However, a quiet review of missing persons reports from the Delmore area between 1959 and 1971 shows a sharp spike, especially in cases involving foster children, itinerants, and undocumented migrants. None of them were ever connected to the Bellmores publicly. None of the remains were ever found. But the land remembered. In 2020, a volunteer archaeological team from a nearby university began a survey of historic Civil War-era structures along the southern Catskills. Though officially unconnected to the Bellmore case, they were granted temporary access to a stretch of land just south of Hartley Woods, technically outside the sealed perimeter, but within view of the original house site. Their LiDAR scans revealed something buried beneath the clearing. Not a structure, not a room, a network, at least 7 narrow tunnels, spidering outward from a central pit. No entrances, no ventilation. At the heart of the formation, an anomalous circle of stone, perfectly symmetrical, 9 feet in diameter, ringed with what appeared to be hand-dug alcoves. The layout matched no known cultural pattern, but one detail chilled the lead researcher: the stone itself. It was basalt, imported possibly from a volcanic quarry over 2,000 miles away, and embedded in the surface of the circle was a series of burn marks, consistent with repeated exposure to flame. When asked to describe the pattern, the researcher wrote, "It looks like something was trying to climb out." The study was halted before any excavation could begin. No official reason was provided. A private company acquired the land within a month and fenced it off, citing liability risks. But someone got one final photo out, a thermal scan taken during the last night of the survey. At 3:42 a.m., a camera captured a sharp spike in heat from the center of the buried circle. The team had gone home for the night. No one was present, and yet, in the center of the circle there was a single hot spot, human-sized, upright, motionless. The file was labeled, "A figure in Chamber 7, no known entry point." Whatever the Bellmores began, it had not ended. The house was gone, the witnesses silenced, but the shape still lived under Delmore, waiting, watching, memorizing every blink. In 2021, Delmore held its first public memorial for the missing. It was quiet, a small gathering, mostly aging residents, clergy, and a few reporters. 31 names were read aloud in the community hall, among them Charlie Weller, Michael Cresswell, and 3 children from the 1980s who had never been linked to the Bellmores officially, but whose disappearances carried the same unanswered weight. A plaque was unveiled that read simply, "In memory of those who vanished. We remember the silence." It was the town's first real acknowledgement of what had happened, or at least what might have. But it came too late for many. The soil beneath Hartley Woods had long grown over, but the fear remained close to the surface. In the months following the memorial, retired Deputy Lena Morse, who had been part of the original 1973 team that discovered the Bellmore basement, agreed to speak publicly for the first time. She was 76, diagnosed with terminal cancer. Her interview with journalist Evan Langley was recorded under the condition it not be aired until after her death. She began by describing the air in the house. "It wasn't just rot," she said. "It was the smell of breath, like something had been breathing in that space for a very long time. Something patient." Langley pressed her on what she remembered seeing. She hesitated. "There was a moment," she said, "when I looked in one of the basement mirrors, and for half a second I didn't see myself. I saw a girl. Her mouth was sewn shut, but her eyes weren't afraid. They were full of pity." Langley asked if she believed in the supernatural. "No," she said, "but I believe in memory, and places that remember for us." After Morse's death, Langley wrote an investigative piece titled "The Unspoken Door," which circulated briefly in independent journalism circles before being taken down after legal pressure from a private entity. He has since gone silent, but the article quoted one final testimony, an anonymous source claiming to be the child of one of Gideon Bellmore's former theology students. The source, who went by the pseudonym R.A., shared pages from an old notebook allegedly belonging to Bellmore himself. While the handwriting could not be officially verified, the tone was unmistakable. One entry read, "Mirrors are not made to reflect light. That is a trick of glass. They are made to hold form. A room full of mirrors is not an illusion. It is a trap. The soul cannot leave what it cannot recognize." Another line followed, "We do not enter the sanctum. The sanctum enters us." These writings, along with surviving fragments of Threnody Institute correspondence, pointed toward a singular belief that certain spaces in the world act as conduits, not to another dimension, but to an unfinished thought. An entity that could only exist in reflection, fed by attention, sharpened by grief, and bound by ritual repetition. The Bellmore basement was not built to contain something physical. It was built to remember it. And once you remember something that was never supposed to be named, you give it shape. It is no coincidence that every disappearance near the site followed a similar pattern. Children drawing circles, whispering about names not taught to them, standing in silence before mirrors. They were not victims of madness, they were witnesses, and each became another entry point. The question is not what the Bellmores were doing. The question is who taught them. In 2023, a new land development company, Hartley Holdings, submitted plans to build a series of modern cabins along the forest's edge. Their pitch included a boutique mirror lodge as part of a high-end retreat. 2 weeks after the plans were announced, one of the contractors, a man named Felix Arden, disappeared during a solo inspection of the wooded perimeter. His GPS tracker showed him stopping for 7 minutes near the old clearing, then vanishing. A drone was later deployed. It found nothing but tire tracks, and a strange impression in the earth where he last stood, roughly circular, 9 feet across. After that, the project was scrapped without explanation. There is nothing left in Delmore today to suggest what the Bellmores did, or what they may have opened. No signage, no markers. The town has returned to stillness. The forest has overgrown its memories. But if you visit in the fall just before dusk, you may find what local teenagers still call the gate, a break in the trees that leads nowhere. And if you stand very quietly near the center of the clearing, you might feel a slight change in pressure, like the air has been listening to you the whole time. You might hear a faint chime. Some believe the Bellmores were mad. Others believe they were cultists, deluded by their own doctrine. But there's a third theory, quietly held by those who've read the sealed files and walked the woods, that Gideon Bellmore did not create the sanctum. He did not summon anything. He simply found the door, and he opened it, not with blood, not with words, but by teaching others how to look. Legal note: as of 2025, the site of the former Bellmore residence remains close to the public under state conservation orders. Trespassing is punishable by fine or arrest. The surrounding woods are considered unstable and hazardous. Final reflection: there are places in this world that remember more than we do, not because they choose to, but because forgetting is something only the living can afford. The Bellmores did not vanish. Not really. They became part of the memory that the basement kept, and the basement is still watching.